Welcome to Real Money Dramas. I never held that kind of money in my hands. But one night, I plugged in an old flash drive I found in a box, and a number lit up on the screen. More than $300,000. I thought it was the answer to everything. But I realized too late. Chances like that always come with a price. My name is Ethan Walker. I am 39. After the divorce, I moved into a small apartment on the edge of Melbourne. The place looked temporary, like I was only passing through. Boxes were stacked against the walls, and I left them unopened because I had no real motivation to unpack. Starting over sounded like a phrase from a self-help book. In reality, it was exhaustion, bills, and silence that I had to get used to. I had lost my marriage, my job, and most of the confidence I once carried. Every day felt like an aftershock of something I could not undo. My ex-wife, Rachel, had moved on quickly, and I was left with the weight of choices that seemed smaller when I made them. At night, I scrolled endlessly through job boards, searching for something that did not feel like another dead end. The truth was simple. I was tired, but life was still demanding I move forward. While digging through old boxes one evening, I pulled out a small black flash drive. I remembered buying it years ago, back when I still believed in plans and lists. I had not seen it in more than a decade. On instinct, I slid it into my laptop. I was expecting photos or maybe old work files. What came up instead made my hands freeze above the keyboard. The folder contained a recovery file. A few lines of random words that meant nothing at first. Then it clicked. It was a seed phrase, a backup to a digital wallet I once created when I was curious about cryptocurrency. My heart started racing. I opened the wallet using the phrase. When the balance appeared, I leaned back in disbelief. The number stared at me, a little over $300,000. I checked it 3 times, convinced I had made a mistake. I had never owned that kind of wealth. 10 years ago, the coins I bought were worth close to nothing. I must have forgotten about them when life pulled me in other directions. But here it was now, a sum larger than anything I had ever earned in my life. I sat there for hours. Every problem that haunted me seemed smaller in an instant. The late rent, the credit card balance, the thought of going back to another meaningless job. All of it looked solvable now. I had stumbled into something that could rebuild everything I had lost. Still, underneath the shock, there was a quiet fear. Nothing in my life had ever arrived this easily. I knew money was supposed to solve problems, but a voice inside whispered that I should not be celebrating yet. I wanted to believe this was my second chance, but part of me sensed it might also be the beginning of something I was not prepared for. On the flash drive, there was another file. A plain text document named list.txt. I opened it without thinking, and a page of words I had forgotten came up. It was a list of goals I had written 10 years earlier. I had titled it, What I Want Before 40. The list was almost childish in its simplicity. Travel to Europe. Buy a house near the coast. Take my father, Robert, out of construction work and help him open a small coffee shop by the sea. Back then, I believed everything was possible if I just worked hard. I had been optimistic, naive maybe, but I had written it with certainty. Reading it now, I felt a mix of shame and sadness. None of those things had happened. Instead, life had gone in another direction. Debt had piled up, work became nothing more than survival, and my marriage collapsed under the pressure. The Ethan who had written that list seemed like a different man. I barely recognized him. But holding that flash drive in my hand, I felt something I had not felt in years. A spark of freedom. The money sitting in that wallet was more than a number on a screen. It was the possibility of finally keeping the promises I once made to myself. I pictured my father behind a counter, greeting customers, smiling in a way I had not seen in years. I pictured myself traveling, not just scrolling through photos of places I could never afford. That night, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the number again. More than $300,000. Enough to wipe out the past and start again. The exhaustion that had weighed me down since the divorce felt lighter, replaced with a strange excitement. For the first time in a long time, tomorrow did not feel like a punishment. I began to plan in my head. Pay off debts. Find a new apartment. Maybe even buy a small house. Something stable, something mine. The list kept circling back to my father. He had worked in construction all his life, moving from job to job, always tired, always one injury away from being forced to quit. A coffee shop by the water. That had been his dream as much as mine. With this money, it could finally happen. The thought of control was intoxicating. I had lived too long under the pressure of bills, bosses, and compromises. Now the power was in my hands. I checked the wallet again and again, like it might vanish if I looked away. It was real. The seed phrase worked. The balance was there. But by the next day, the rush of excitement began to fade into unease. I knew enough about money to understand it was never simple. If I wanted to touch it, if I wanted to turn it into something tangible, I would need to move it. And moving it meant stepping into a system I no longer trusted. Still, I could not let it go. I convinced myself this was the moment my life had been waiting for. I thought I was finally in control. What I did not see was how quickly that control could slip away. I decided to move the coins. I created an account on an exchange platform, uploaded my ID, and went through all the steps they required. It felt like the final gate between me and the life I thought I deserved. The process seemed straightforward, and for the first time in years I felt like I was finally doing something right. The next morning I checked my email. There was a message from the exchange. My account was frozen. The funds were locked until I could provide additional verification and proof of the origin of the coins. I read the email 3 times, each word cutting deeper. The number that had kept me awake all night was suddenly out of reach. I tried to stay calm. I wrote back immediately, asking for clarification, offering to send whatever documents they needed. No reply came. An hour passed. Then a day. My messages went unanswered. I refreshed my inbox every 10 minutes, convinced I would see a response. But the silence dragged on. The panic grew quickly. I joined online forums, searching for answers. That was when I realized how bad it could be. People wrote that coins from old wallets were often flagged. They were labeled as suspicious, connected to stolen assets or transactions from the dark corners of the internet. I read post after post from others who said their funds had been frozen indefinitely. Some had been waiting for months, even years, with no resolution. The excitement I had felt only days earlier turned into dread. I imagined the balance sitting there, trapped, while I remained stuck in the same empty apartment, paying rent late and eating whatever was cheapest. The second chance I thought I had found was already slipping away. Every sound from my phone made me jump. I checked my email the moment a notification appeared, but it was always junk, never the reply I needed. The silence from the exchange became louder than any answer. I started replaying everything in my head, the list, the goals, the promise I had felt when I saw the number. It was all suspended, hanging in the air, with nothing solid to hold on to. I began to question myself. Was I naive for thinking it could be this easy? Was I chasing something that was never really mine? But no matter how much doubt crept in, the truth was unavoidable. The balance was real, and it was right there. I had seen it. The money existed, but it was locked behind a door I could not open. The waiting became unbearable. I stopped checking job boards. I stopped answering calls. All I could think about was the frozen account. My life had been reduced to a single question. Would they release the funds, or was I doomed to watch everything I had dreamed of rot behind a screen? Days kept passing. The exchange gave me nothing. No reply, no update, only silence. Each morning, I woke up hoping for a message. Each night, I went to bed with the same emptiness. The number on the screen had become a curse. I could see it, but I could not touch it. I tried to distract myself, but nothing worked. I stopped opening the curtains. I avoided calls from friends because I had nothing to say. Every thought returned to that frozen account. The balance had started to feel less like hope and more like a trap, a reminder of what I could never have. One evening, I opened the text file again, the list of goals I had written 10 years earlier. I read every line slowly. A house, travel, my father's coffee shop. As I went through them, I realized I had already begun to believe those things were mine. In my head, I had already spent the money. I had already imagined living the life I once dreamed of. But the reality was brutal. I was still in the same apartment, surrounded by half-unpacked boxes, just as lost as the day Rachel walked out. The money was not saving me. It was holding me hostage. I caught myself staring at the list, feeling like a fool for ever believing in it. The fear of losing hope became heavier than the fear of losing the money itself. I knew what it was like to live without wealth. I had been doing it for years. But I did not know how to go back after feeling that glimpse of freedom. I could not unsee the possibility. The days blurred together. I would wake up and check my inbox before I even had coffee. Always the same emptiness. I tried writing to the exchange again, even threatening legal action, though I knew I could not afford it. Nothing changed. My words disappeared into silence. At night, I replayed conversations I wanted to have with my father. I pictured myself telling him his dream of a coffee shop was finally possible. But the words stayed in my head. I could not bring myself to call him and risk admitting it was all an illusion. The longer I waited, the more I realized something inside me was breaking. I was not just fighting for money. I was fighting against the thought that my life had already ended years ago, and this was only proof of it. I reached a point where I no longer cared about the rules. Hope had slipped into desperation. I told myself it was better to risk everything than to keep living in limbo. The waiting was worse than failure. So I made my choice. I would act, no matter the cost. A week passed with no answer. My emails were ignored, the balance stayed frozen, and the silence pressed down harder each day. Then, one night, I was scrolling through videos to distract myself. I stopped at a clip of an older man, maybe 60, climbing a trail in New Zealand. He had a heavy pack on his back, his steps slow but determined. In the comments someone had written, "Wish I had the time to do this. Too late for me now." That line stayed with me. I kept thinking about it as the video played again in the background. Too late. For the first time I asked myself if I was wasting my own time waiting on strangers to decide my future. I thought about the years I had already lost, the dead-end jobs, the marriage that collapsed, the list of goals I had written and abandoned. The money on that screen had turned into a chain around my neck. I was tired of waiting. I realized I still had something no balance could replace: time. And I was letting it drain away by doing nothing. That night I made a decision I had been avoiding. I opened my laptop, not to check the exchange, but to book a ticket. A one-way flight. My savings weren't much, but they were enough for me to leave. I told myself if I was going to gamble, I would gamble on myself, not on the silence of some faceless company. The next morning, I wrote my resignation email. My boss was surprised but not curious enough to ask why. For years I had given him my hours, my energy, my health. Ending it took only a few sentences. I hit send and felt lighter than I had in months. With the last of my savings, I bought a camera. Nothing fancy, just enough to record the journey. I wanted proof I was doing something, that I wasn't just another man watching life slip past him. As I packed a small bag, I felt a strange calm settle in. I had no plan beyond the first flight. But even that uncertainty felt more alive than the weeks of waiting by the inbox. When the confirmation email for the ticket arrived, I stared at it for a long time. Bangkok, then wherever I decided to go next. No return date. No safety net. It was reckless, but the thought of staying where I was felt worse. That evening I stood in my apartment surrounded by the same boxes I never unpacked. For once, I didn't care. I left them behind. Everything I needed fit into a single backpack. The rest could stay. I locked the door and walked away. Not because I had solved anything, but because I couldn't keep standing still. The first stop was Bangkok. The air was heavy, crowded with noise, heat, and movement. I stayed in a hostel, ate food from street vendors, and filmed short clips on my camera. I had no script, no plan, just raw moments. To my surprise, people started watching. Each upload brought new subscribers. Their comments were small but encouraging. "Love the energy. Keep sharing your journey." For the first time in years, I felt like someone was listening. From there, I went to Nepal. The streets were chaotic, the faces unfamiliar, but I felt lighter. I met travelers in cheap dorms, swapped stories, filmed markets, mountain paths, conversations with strangers. I uploaded everything. It wasn't polished, but it was real, and people seemed to care. Every night I read their words before falling asleep. I wasn't making money, but I was making something that felt alive. The more I traveled, the further away the frozen account felt. I had stopped refreshing my inbox every 10 minutes. I barely thought about the coins, though they lingered somewhere in the back of my mind. For the first time since Rachel left, I wasn't defined by what I had lost. I was moving, breathing, building something new. Then one afternoon, Sitting in a cafe in Kathmandu, I opened my email. The subject line froze me in place. Your account status has been updated. My hands trembled as I clicked it. The message was short, almost careless. One sentence. Your funds have been released. I stared at the words for a long time. I refreshed the wallet, half convinced it was a mistake. But there it was. The balance was back, untouched, waiting. More than $300,000, free again. My first reaction wasn't joy. It was shock. For weeks I had been living without it, adjusting to hostels and cheap meals, surviving off savings. Now, suddenly, the weight I thought was gone had dropped back into my lap. I closed the laptop and sat in silence. Around me, travelers were laughing, planning treks, sharing food. I couldn't hear any of it. All I could see was the number on that screen. The same number that had nearly broken me once already. That night, I didn't film anything. I walked through the streets aimlessly, wondering if this was another trap. I had left everything behind because I couldn't stand waiting for it. And now it was here, mine again. The question hit me harder than I expected. What was I supposed to do with it now? Now I had the money again. More than $300,000, unlocked, available with a few clicks. The same number that once felt like salvation was staring back at me. For most of my life, this would have been the end of the story. Pay debts, buy a home, secure a future. I could have returned to Melbourne, settled into a safer version of the life I thought I wanted. But sitting in Kathmandu, I realized something had shifted. The thought of going back to an office, to bills stacked on the counter, to the same streets where everything had collapsed. It felt like a prison I couldn't re-enter. The money gave me a choice, but not the one I had expected. I thought of my father. I could help him stop breaking his back on construction sites. I imagined calling him, telling him to find a spot near the beach, to start building his coffee shop. That image made me smile, but it didn't answer the question that weighed on me. What about me? The old list had been clear: houses, travel, security. But those lines didn't match the man I had become. After weeks of living out of a backpack, moving through hostels, filming strangers who treated me like a friend, I realized I didn't want a return ticket. I wanted to keep moving. One evening, I sat on the roof of the hostel, watching the mountains in the distance. Their shape was impossible to ignore. Everest. The word kept repeating in my head. I had no climbing experience, no plan, but the thought of standing at the base of it felt right. Not as a symbol, but as a path. The decision came suddenly. I would use the money, but not to buy my way back into the life I had escaped. I would use it to go forward, not backward. The idea was reckless, maybe even stupid, but it was mine. That night, I logged into the wallet. My hand hovered over the keyboard before I entered the first transfer. I sent money to my account, the first step toward turning numbers on a screen into something real. It wasn't about spending. It was about choosing. As the confirmation appeared, I felt a calm I hadn't known in months. I wasn't just waiting anymore. I was moving again, this time with the means to go as far as I wanted. The next goal was clear. Everest was waiting. Once I knew Everest was my next step, I started making decisions quickly. The money was there, and for the first time, I had the freedom to use it without fear. But before I left Nepal for the climb, there were things I needed to settle. The first transfer I made wasn't for me. I sent a large sum to my father, Robert. I wrote him a short message: find that spot by the coast. Build your coffee shop. I didn't explain where the money came from. I didn't tell him about the flash drive, the exchange, or the weeks of panic. I just gave him the chance I couldn't give him before. The second transfer was harder. I sent money to Rachel, my ex-wife. Enough for the down payment on the house she had once dreamed of. I didn't write a message. I didn't want her to think it was an attempt to win her back. It wasn't. It was simply something I felt I had to do. She had spent years beside me, through good and bad. I had failed her in many ways. This was the only way I knew to give her something back. When the confirmations came through, I stared at the screen. My balance dropped, but I didn't feel regret. I felt something steadier. It wasn't euphoria, not even relief. Just a quiet sense that this was right. The money wasn't meant to sit locked in a digital vault, tormenting me. It was meant to move, to change something, even if it wasn't for me directly. After that, I stopped hesitating. I booked my permit and my gear for the trek to Everest Base Camp. It felt unreal, typing in my details and paying with funds that only weeks ago had been unreachable. Yet, I didn't treat it like a celebration. It was just the next step, the only step that made sense. A week later, I stood in Kathmandu again, but this time with a clear destination. The streets were the same, busy, loud, crowded with faces. But I was different. I wasn't wandering aimlessly anymore. I had a purpose, even if I didn't know what the end of it would look like. On the morning I was set to leave for the mountains, I checked my messages. My father had sent a single photo, a small storefront near the ocean, a for lease sign in the window. His words were simple, thinking this could work. That was enough. I packed my bag, zipped it shut, and stepped outside. The air was sharp, the sky clear. I didn't look back. The trek toward Everest Base Camp was harder than I expected. The air grew thinner each day, the climb steeper, but I kept moving. Each step felt deliberate, as if I was leaving behind the weight of the last decade. I wasn't rushing. I wasn't competing. I was simply going forward, 1 mile at a time. One afternoon, I stopped at a cliffside with a view of the valley below. The wind was sharp, carrying the smell of stone and snow. From where I stood, I could see the river winding far beneath me, and in the distance, the mountains rising higher than anything I had ever known. I set down my pack and just stood there, letting the silence cover everything. For the first time in months, my thoughts weren't spinning. I wasn't waiting for an email or watching numbers on a screen. I wasn't imagining what I should buy or how to rebuild the version of life I once thought I wanted. I was simply there, present. I thought of my father, Robert, back in Victoria. I pictured him unlocking the door to a small coffee shop by the beach, running his hand over the counter he had always dreamed of. I thought of Rachel, standing in front of the house she had once described late at night, when we were still together. I imagined her finally walking inside, starting fresh in a way we never could as a couple. The money had given me the power to do those things for them, but it wasn't the reason I was here. I realized that now. The reason was simpler. I needed to prove to myself that I was still alive, still capable of choosing, still capable of moving forward even when everything told me to stop. When I reached the final stretch before base camp, I climbed onto a rocky ledge that looked out over the snowfields. I stood there, breathing slowly, the cold air burning my lungs. I didn't take out the camera. I didn't need proof. I thought about the man I used to be, the one staring at a frozen account, refreshing his inbox every 10 minutes, waiting for someone else to decide if he could live. That man felt distant now, like someone I used to know. The path wasn't finished. The summit was far above me, unreachable for now. But it didn't matter. I wasn't here for the peak. I was here for the climb itself. I tightened the straps on my pack, looked once more at the white horizon, and kept walking. Thanks for listening to the story till the end. Write in the comments what you think about all this. Subscribe. More untold stories are on the way.